Hello and welcome to Game Design Hour. I'm your host, Miles Goldsmith, and on each episode, I sit down with the people behind the video games you know and love. And I am back from a bit of a hiatus. Now, in today's episode, I sat down with Alexis Royce, the creator of Hoping This Finds You Well. Now, without any further ado, let's meet our guest and get into the interview.
My name is Alexis Royce. I was essentially the solo dev for Hoping This Finds You Well. I was lucky enough to, when I was brushing it up for Steam, have somebody help out with some programming and didn't do the composing. But other than that, a lot of the programming and writing and all the art, that was all me.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you're much more of a graphic novelist than a quote-unquote traditional game developer. What drove you to bringing these stories to life as games rather than novels or webcomics?
Well, I got started as a webcomic artist back in 2007 and did that and conventions and stuff. But I've always really enjoyed adventure games and visual novels, and the RenPy game engine has been around for a long time. So I'd always been like poking around with that, but never really, completed a project or did more than just playing around until about 2017. And that's when I made May I Take Your Order? And it was really nice to just kind of like sit, and there was no like actual game jam going on, but I gave myself like game jam constraints, like get this done in a month. I really love deadlines. So that helped me out with that. And I don't know, back in the day while I was making it, I was like, oh man, this is so weird. Are you allowed to make something that's so weird? And I made it and it was fine. It was fine and everything. And then the other day I went back and I looked at it and it was like, oh, it wasn't really that weird. And somebody was playing it on Twitch, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty weird. So I don't know. I just started making some games. Like they can be a little bit on the weird side, but I love that that you've got different languages that you're working with, especially with visual novels specifically. That you have the prose that you're working with, that you have visuals, both that you can compose like a CG and have, this like full screen shot, or that you have this like stage language of sprites on a screen talking to each other. And then with all that, you also have the interactive element. So if you're doing like a simple visual novel, even the fact like a kinetic visual novel with no choices, you still click to continue, and there's still so much you can do with that. That's something that I think about a lot when I'm making a game, and one of the things that's pulled me more and more away from comics is that you get to really interact with the reader or the player a lot that way. And I love that, again, even just the clicking ahead, that can be turned into something, like the sliding mechanic for Hoping This Finds You Well. It can give the same feeling as like a page turn, because one of the web comics I did was horror, and so you'd sometimes build up a moment and somebody won't want to turn the page. If you've ever read like Junji Ito, you'll get to a point where you're like, I don't want to do this, and you've got the book right there. And yeah, you can get that same feeling with video games of, the player is the one who's going to keep pushing it forward. And I don't know, that just there's so many different things that you can do with interactivity.
Tell me a bit about what sparked your interest in creating this specific story for Hoping This Finds You Well, and where your first thoughts for the game come from. I know it's a prequel, but what led you to want to create that story specifically?
Well, it actually came out of trying to figure out what to do with Serialized Killer and like the whole bigger story that I wanted to do, because that was back when I was still mainly doing web comics and just doing visual novels on the side. And, my assumption was I like the story. I want to turn it into a comic. I was trying to get the story down. And so I did a NaNoWriMo one year, and I barely got into the story, even though I did my 50,000 words. But I had all these like letters that were taking place in between chapters of the story. And so I had like the current story going on in the chapters, and in between there was Harry and Holly's correspondence. And the correspondence was really what I was having a lot more fun with. And that's what was building nicely. And I really, even while I was writing it, I had the feeling of like, well, how would I do these panel compositions? This is a fun moment, but like, who would I put on screen for this one? Because both of them are having these reactions. Both of them are like, changing and growing while this is going on. They both have these good character moments. And I got so greedy. So I was like, I don't want to choose. And a visual novel will be so much better for that. But like, you know, I was already starting to feel out that wouldn't it be cool if a visual novel existed where you could slide back and forth? Wow, somebody should make something like that. And then I promptly forgot about it for 3 years.
I mean, you talked about this a little, but I mean, with the split screen nature of the game, did you ever think about having an option to be able to see both characters at the same time? I often found myself kind of holding the letter in the center of the screen so I could see both of them.
Honestly, I've seen people who do that, and that's one of the reasons why I was really glad to have set it up the way that it did,
Mhm.
is because I think that the desire to get to see both of them at the same time, I think that's kind of part of it because they're having this long distance relationship and they already have something, there's all this distance that's between them and they can only communicate through these letters. It's something like the text box as kind of representing communication itself. I don't know, that's going to sound really, really, I don't like to say pretentious unless it's about me. It sounds really pretentious. But when you're designing a HUD, you want to think about these things that you're not expecting the readers to have to think that far into. And the text box being the only way that they can communicate, it's something that's in between them. I didn't want to make it too easy or have like a split screen with the letters at the bottom like a normal text box because they don't have the benefit of seeing each other's reactions. If it was too easy, then you'd be like, oh, you kind of feel like they're existing in the same space when they weren't. So it was really important, even in some places in the game when you try to pull over and look at like Harry while he's like not writing the letters, the box will kind of shift back a little bit on its own because Holly can't even imagine or think about what's going on. You're like really cut off from him. I don't know, having a split like that, I felt was really important.
Mhm.
And then that also kind of builds toward the end of the game when, Holly has made it to Harry's city and they get the letter from the provost or the head of the department who's really antagonistic towards them. But when you slide the letter over, they're both in Harry's office. That lets them finally be in a situation where they're in the same room, they're on the same side. They don't need the letter to communicate. You can see them looking at each other and laughing together. They're on a new wavelength.
No, I really loved that part of the game where you break from what was the traditional, just the two of them writing letters. Can you tell me a bit about like why you chose to change it in that way with adding in a third character?
First off, that's kind of what I'd already written within the nano, that I was like doing letters, and I don't think I had anybody else that was writing letters in there. But there's all these great old stories and books, like Dracula or Frankenstein, that are composed of letters. And my all-time favorite, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is broken up into 3 separate like eyewitness accounts. You've got like Utterson writing everything down, and then Lanyon has a really short segment, and then the last is Jekyll's statement of the case and everything. And I like unreliable narrators. And if you keep everything with people very specifically talking, you get these accounts of what's going on and it's through their eyes. And so you can start to feel, especially hypocrisy. I love that. And it's very funny and it's, very teeth grinding. And having this one letter from somebody else, Harry spent so much time talking up what academia here is like. And then we finally get to hear from somebody else that Holly isn't fitting in because Harry would be too kind to write in a letter like, oh, so you're not fitting in, you're having trouble, you're making trouble for everybody. You need somebody else to complain about all of that. And, at that point, it was important not just to have Harry and Holly both reacting to what was being said about Holly, but that you could see them looking towards each other, Holly looking nervously to Harry, like after something that's like, you really fucked this up. You shouldn't have done this. And to see whether Harry is going to be like, oh my God, I've made a mistake, or whether he smiles back at Holly and he's like, don't worry, I got your back. I think finally them getting to react to each other instead of just to the letters. It's very, it's much more personal.
With pretty much every game, book, everything, there is interesting ideas that get cut for one reason or another. What were some interesting ideas that you thought about for the game, but just ended up cutting at some point?
I actually only got halfway through the letters that I'd written for Harry and Holly, But the place that the game ends felt like a pretty like while I was looking through it and figuring out what to do, I was like, that has to be the last thing you see in the game. That has to be where it ends. Like it's the same when you're like writing sentences while writing, that you want to end on a point that's really, really strong. You want to know, like, even if you haven't said everything that you could possibly have said, as long as you've gotten across something strong that has a reaction, you can work with that and that'll let you know like what you want to focus on. And that letter always made me laugh so hard, and it marks a turning point in their relationship. So I was like, I don't care if this is half as long as it would be. And it was already 10,000 words is enough for a novella. That's a good place to stop. So when I got there, I was like, chop. I'm stopping right there. This is excellent scope. I can get this done in the amount of time that I have set. I'm not overscoping. I can do this. That's an ending that's still making me smile, passed all those gut tests. And so I was like, stop right there. There were a couple things that I had to cut because I only had 2 weeks to work on this one initially. And then when I came back to brush it up for Steam, I was able to toss in a couple things that I had to cut, like just some background elements, some of the clutter in Harry's study, or the skyboxes were actually a big, that's the one that hurt the most the first time getting it out. That when you play it now, you can see like the city behind Harry's office, and that I couldn't get that one done in time, which I was like, the setting's important. It's just little things like that, adding in like a one extra pose for Harry. But generally I'm pretty good with scope cutting because I try to make sure that I know what is most important to the game and how to get there. So I can generally be pretty honest with myself if there's something that I really like or I think is fun, but isn't really helping achieve like the major goals. I'll go, okay, get rid of it. But I'm lead on my projects, so I get to make those calls, and I generally get to decide what's important anyway. So it's not like it's the most painful thing in the world for me.
I mean, I loved the ending of the game with breaking from the letter format and seeing where their relationship is now. I mean, tell me a bit more about creating that ending and deciding to properly break from the letting format and having the only piece of spoken dialogue in the game.
Well, I think we all love kind of like an interface screw or a format change.
Yeah.
Like I think that you really have to earn it when you're doing it so that it doesn't feel cheap. But I think that when you do a format change, it's going to recontextualize some things. So you have to know why you're doing it. And again, you're making really complex choices that the reader doesn't have to think that hard about. They just get to go, oh, different, fun, and hopefully they vibe and they feel what you're trying to communicate. But yeah, in the original Nano draft, I got to that point, and that was the first time that Harry was just like writing in his private journal instead of writing a letter. So he's such a stuffed shirt. It's Edwardian style, but he's still like drenched in Victorian style ethics, and so he's been playing so much as close to the vest as possible, been trying to look like this proper upstanding guy. And then just in his own journal, I think the line that I had him write was just, oh my God, I fucked Holly Faraday. And that's just the end. That was just the whole thing. And it really made me laugh there. And I wanted to keep that feeling, but I was like, I've got visuals now. I don't have to do this just with text. And so it was like, I should show just a Holly in bed right there. So that's a fun thing to do format wise, that like you get this feeling of like a reveal when, if I'd done this earlier on in the story, it wouldn't have meant anything. That like, oh, the other half of this is his bedroom. Who cares? That means nothing. It's not really a reveal to show that the rest of the room exists. But you haven't gotten to have this look into this private portion of his life yet. You've only seen like his office or the places he's been working. So you get that feeling like you're getting to see something that you hadn't gotten to see before. The juxtaposition between Harry just losing his shit and Holly sleeping there beatifically in bed makes me laugh. That, Holly is like, oh yes, I've just gotten to snuggle up to the man that I love. This romance is finally happening for me. And there's Harry on the other side of the room going, I've made my working situation just absolutely intolerable. Shit, damn it. Just I cackled thinking about doing it with a speech bubble. But, that's one of the things that just comes out of, gameplay mechanics too, in that if I'm going to be hiding that half of the screen, if I'm hiding the text box, I don't want to pull it back up to have him write that. Why would you want to hide Holly? Why would you want to change the frame that you've got? You've got a good shot here. You've got a good joke here. Don't encumber it. And, so thinking back, how would I do it with a comic? I'd have a speech bubble, it could possibly be done with like a voice line, but I think that would have been way too far out of left field for what had already been set up. So I don't know. It all felt the right way to kind of communicate all of that, the right tools, and then I don't think it counts as a smash cut, but feeling like smash cut to credits, louder, boisterous music, feeling there's lots of YouTube videos and jokes that'll like cut to credits after like a good joke like that. So I was like, all right, we'll do that. And hopefully that means that as the credits are rolling, people will be laughing, because it made me laugh real hard. And thankfully, from the people, the playtesters who checked it out and the people I've seen LPing it or streaming it, the ending always gets a laugh. So I'm like, yes, excellent.
If I remember correctly, the writing was not the text you said from the initial thing you wrote. Why not keep that text even while showing?
Oh, definitely the nitty gritty of a joke here, but I think I fucked Holly Faraday. It's very funny, but I think that it was funny to me because it's so uncouth, but also in just playing something when you're making a visual novel, you are communicating with these multiple languages. And one of the great things that you get to do is you can communicate different things at the same time using those languages. And so that keeps things from being repetitive. And that means you can like stuff a bunch of meaning in, as long as you're not like overburdening the reader. And because it's not like animation or film, people can take their time. They can wait to click, which means you can stop and stay in that moment as long as you like, which is similar to like a comic book. So it's like, ooh, I love visual novels. They can do so many cool things. So there was no reason to have Harry say, I fucked Holly Faraday, if you are just visually getting rid of the text box and showing Holly asleep in his bed. I could bring out the joke in different ways. Like that will be communicated, but in a different way using a different language. So you get multiple beats there of the text box goes away. So the reader is going to be like, oh, text box is gone. I can see his bedroom. I can see his bed. So there's, like looking through a painting or a comic panel, there's an eye path there. You're going to see how that works. And you give the reader their time to figure out what they're doing there, what they're seeing, to comprehend that. And then I think Harry's got, there's like a click of him reacting visually as he looks over to Holly. So drawing his eye back, you're sitting with Harry in that moment, you're building up the anticipation for the joke of going, how is he going to react? Because, he's already got this 1,000-yard stare. How does he feel? How does he feel about what he's done? Because he already said, oh my God, what have I done? And then he looks away, he's processing, and then just the word balloon of him just going, shit. Just keep it simple. Don't over encumber it. He spent the whole game being this verbose pile of garbage. I love him. Where he's talking, he's over explaining, he's trying to control everything and scratching words out and rewriting and everything. All he's got left is just one expletive. He doesn't need to explain anything. He just needs to react. And that reaction is just shit.
So tell me a bit about creating the art for the game and using it as you've talked about to convey the story even when they're not the person writing the letter.
I kept the art pretty simple, and I added a little bit back in once or a little bit of extra stuff when I was porting it to Steam. But in general, I tried not to overcomplicate on it. The locations, I tried to make sure they were switching up enough so that there was like visual appeal and you didn't feel like they were in the same place all the time. And so you could get to see a little bit of what was going on with Holly's ship. It's still a little sad I didn't get to show any of his shipmates, but that really would have overcomplicated things. But mostly I knew, and this is where I try to put a lot of effort in with my other VNs. I think that front loading, like you're putting your extra effort into having more expressions and character poses is really important for any visual novel that is highly based in conversation and communication between the characters. And I tried to make sure that they would have a lot of time to react. So a lot of their expressions and their poses, like, Harry's got a pose where he kicks back in his chair and he's like, really relaxed and everything. Harry's got a lot of like Henry Jekyll in him. That's where like the overarching story. It's like, what if Henry Jekyll or one of those mad scientists from Gothic horror had survived? And so this is him doing the horrible, horrible mad science. And in the book, he's got these great moments where he's like, "Oh my God, I'm so great." Everybody's actually kind of immoral compared to me. I'm really good. And so, just Harry sitting back and like basking in the praise that Holly's giving him, because Holly's smitten with him from like the beginning of it. Or Harry like leaning forward and putting the letter up because he's like overanalyzing. He's like, what does this mean? Because I mean, that's something that we still have very much nowadays. Like if you've texted with somebody or, you've had correspondence with somebody or internet friends, I think, we've all stared at a text or a chat window or a Discord window and gone, what do you mean by that? What does that mean? What's going on there? I didn't have full long distance with my spouse, but there were a few summers where, we weren't living anywhere near each other and, lots of AIM conversations. So I really remember those being, the intimate trying to figure out like, oh, what do you mean by that? Is this, is that? So I don't know, trying to focus on that feeling with the correspondence. And Holly doesn't have like a ton of different poses because he's more, emotionally stable than Harry is. He's not always bouncing all over the place. But I did give him like the spit take and some nervous moments, kind of like with the ending. There's some places where I really will trust my gut, and especially that's with humor. That comes from having done, web comics and being a forever GM for my tabletop group, and doing a lot of games by now that I've gotten to see people like play on air, where you get to have that play testing and that feedback of knowing what reactions from yourself are going to get those reactions from other people. I think it was like Pat at Polygon who called it like a hee hoo hoo moment or something. It was really good. But I think about it now as like the hee hoo hoo test, that if I'm writing something, and sometimes I'll laugh at something and I'll be like, oh, that's a joke for me. Oh, that's kind of funny. I like that, but it doesn't really work. But when you really get that hee hee hoo hoo moment, like for me, when I get that, I'm like, oh, that is hitting me the right way, and that is definitely going to go over well. And so trying to look for that kind of vibe sometimes, especially with the art, that if something's very hee hee hoo hoo, or I'm like, that's stupid as fuck. Why? Oh my God, that's dumb. All right, I'm moving that up the list. That's something that I'll try to protect from a scope knife as best as I can.
So we never hear the characters, but how did you find it to develop a unique like voice within the writing for each of the characters, and what challenges did you find with making the characters feel different from each other through writing?
Honestly, I'm still not super happy with the character voices, mostly Holly's. We got better with that in Serialized Killer, and I've continued to work with that because I really wanted to show Holly going from trying to be on his best behavior and trying to write kindly to Harry. And, in the middle of the game, Harry stops writing to him for a while, and that kind of like breaks down the first wall between them, because afterwards, Holly's not trying to be so nice to him anymore. He tells him when he's a dumbass. And I think that that's kind of an important point for any relationship to go through. You have to have your first, not like unhealthy fight, but if you don't have your first, argument with a friend or somebody that you're falling in love with, you can't really bridge that gap of knowing what it's like when you're at odds with somebody or you've made a mistake. And I don't know if Holly's voice is as different before and after that point as I really wanted it to be. And I think in trying to keep up the really, stilted Victorian Edwardian sort of feel. Old books like that have this feeling where people are withholding so much of themselves, and then occasionally they'll just like break through with something deeply emotive. I love it. I love it. I think it's in the tagline ish for hoping. Yeah, the distinctly sweet homoeroticism of Victorian and Edwardian literature. So that's the tone. That's the sort of writing that I wanted to go for. And I'm really happy with that tone. And it also suits Harry well, but Holly should have been a lot more rough and coarse in the way that he talks. And he's much better at that. He's much better with that and with his awkwardness when he talks in person in Serialized Killer. So that's something that I'd say I wish that I could have done better, but I needed to kind of write this and see how it looked like in order to see how to improve that.
I love how the flirting with them starts out very subtle and then gradually grows. Can you tell me a bit about creating and developing their relationship and how that progresses through the story?
Well, thank you. Yeah, basically, I wanted them to go from kind of like work colleagues, these two people in a similar academic field, one very well established already, and the other kind of like making his way into it. And that, there's all this, there's distance between people at the start of like any relationship, but there's like physical distance between them here. There's not academic, but prestige difference between the two of them because Holly really, really looks up to Harry. And part of their relationship is them learning that if you've ever, met somebody that you really, really admire to become friends with them, either, not either, but like it could turn into a never meet your hero situation, or once like the shine's off the apple, you can go, well, they're not who I thought they were, but they're their own person and they've got all this complexity and I like them more even because of it. And I wanted Holly to be able to go through some of that of like, this is somebody that I really look up to. And, Harry is soaking up the praise because he wants people to look up to him. He wants people to admire him so much. And that's a huge reason why he starts writing back to Holly in the first place, because he's getting all these compliments. He gets to feel like, oh, look at me putting, I'm not pulling up the ladder behind me. I'm helping people, oh man, I'm such a great guy. And, Harry keeps on kind of not quite noticing how much his letters mean to Holly. And I think even by the end of the game, we're still seeing that distance between them, that they're getting closer and that they've started to show esteem for one another and, right, that they have this affection. But there's still this gap of Holly going like, oh, we've taken this relationship to its next natural step. And Harry going, this isn't where I thought it would go. And I like that a lot when it comes to, I don't know, I guess that's just relationship writing in general, but to still have that messiness that like you're getting closer, but you're not quite there yet, because relationships, even the most beautiful ones, you're always learning more about each other. And so I think, I don't know, kind of a series of fuck ups that you don't ruin the relationship over, and you keep having patience, and then you realize it's actually kind of nicer to have fucked up, and now you're actually more comfortable around each other. So, plenty of that, plenty of, just like slowly, you see them slowly testing the water with things that like, Harry's really scared to talk to Holly about the fact that he's doing this research that could get him kicked out of society. And Holly's like, no, I'm here for it. I'm totally into it. So him testing the waters there a bit. And, Holly really doesn't ever have to test the waters too much. Like he's he can't talk about the fact that he's on a pirate ship to keep everybody around him safe. But other than that, he's such an honest sort of guy that he just like continually barrels forward and barrels forward and barrels forward.
Are there any fun small details that you've personally added into the game that you don't feel many players notice but you really like?
Oh man, I'm trying to think about that one because I'm really, really lucky that a lot of times my readers are really smart about things. Like they pick up on so much that there'll be like a little detail or something where a character will be kind of like, alluding to, I don't know. I really keep an eye out for things. I can't say that there's anything that I felt that people super miss. I think sometimes, regrettably, even when you have a character say, I'm gay, you'll have players who go, oh my God, is he gay? Is he supposed to be gay? And I see that less as a problem with the readers as it is because like I think a lot of us, as queer readers have been so, conditioned to go like, no, don't expect them to be gay. Why would you expect them to be gay? Nobody's writing them to be gay. So, I'll say stuff, like Harry will go like, I've got a friend who's transgender and that's really rough on him. And sometimes you'll have people go, oh my God, is Harry transgender? Like a little bit of that and a little bit of, I mean, I guess, so I think that whenever there's something that I've intended that the readers like aren't getting, I usually see that as a flaw, either in my own writing or, just something that I need to work a bit more on. Like a big thing readers were missing before I updated the art was it felt a lot more ambiguous whether Holly was on a pirate ship or not, which is something I'd hoped to communicate more through like the art and the backgrounds. So for his first like letter up on the deck, I put a big old pirate flag on the deck because I wanted to have that in a shot somewhere so that you could have the, environmental storytelling and the discrepancy between what they're telling each other and what's actually going on. We've got a little bit of that later on, like when Harry is talking about, oh, I have to go do this job at a bar, and I can't believe I'm going to such a place of debauchery and sin. I'm gonna have to go there tomorrow, but they're gonna have to drag me there. And like visually, you can see that he is sitting at the bar already, and he has 2 drinks next to him, and it's like, you piece of shit, you liar, you cad.
Looking back now, is there anything that you wish you could have done differently while creating the game?
Yeah, there's a couple places where, I wish I could have had a little bit more, art or this or that, but it's such a slippery slope. Like it's what I do, when I'm painting and stuff too. And it's something you learn really fast when you're doing, comic work with a tight deadline. Because I had 2 web comics for about a decade, both updating every week. And you really learn that doing your best is not about what you are physically capable of completing, like, oh, if you don't work yourself until you pass out at your desk, that doesn't count as your best. There's just a point at which everything, whether it's a painting or a comic page or a short story or a game, where you just have to stare at it and you have to go, is what I'm going to add, is that going to accomplish the goals that this piece needs to accomplish? Have I accomplished those goals? And am I just trying to polish it now? A certain level of game polish can be necessary to achieve your goals. Like sometimes putting in that extra CG might be the difference between people taking the story seriously or not. Or, you might need another rewrite to a scene because it's not actually flowing well and it's not communicating the themes that need to pop up later. Sometimes that work is going to make a difference. But a lot of times when I look back at the stuff that I've made, I can see like dozens and dozens and dozens of flaws. And I'll be like, wow, that sucks. Oh, I did that bad. Wish I hadn't made that choice. But I mean, people are too hard on themselves. You don't learn unless you've made something that's incomplete first. I don't know. I think when I was in my early 20s, I was a lot meaner to myself about looking back at my art and going, I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd done that. But it's a lot easier to let go of things. I almost it's actually like less fun when I'm polishing something up for Steam now to go back in and be like, well, now I have the benefit of, like a few weeks or a month or whatever my deadline is to get this fixed and polished up. Because now I have to go, well, I accomplished my baseline goal. What am I trying to do now? Like, if I'm going to polish it up, what will actually make this better and what is just to suit my own ego? And that's not fun because it turns into none of the stuff that would be fun for me to fix, just the stuff that will actually make it better. So you have to sit there and just stare at all the stuff that like hurts you on a spiritual level and go, nobody cares about that but me. And I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to touch it.
What's next for you? What are you working on now?
Well, I am early development in the next murder mystery for Serialized Killer. So I'm not done with Holly and Harry. Just did some location scouting on a big old boat to figure out how to write a murder mystery on an ironclad ship. So that'll be fun, and probably shouldn't talk too much about that because even the circumstances of the murder mystery in a Serialized Killer, some people are like, oh, I thought it was this, but it was actually this, and I want to do that again. I want people going into it to be like, okay, all right, I know what we're going to do. I can see what we're going to do, and then the murder shows up, and they're like, what? So I think that's very, very fun, especially, I think a lot of good murder mystery writers will. That's how they keep you from being able to suss out all of the clues your first time round, is by really like switching up the circumstances. So, when you're a really astute murder mystery reader, you get so much, you notice all this information and stuff. But if you're expecting it to go one place and then it goes another, you've kind of made a grocery list for tacos, and then they're like, okay, make a pizza. You're like, no, but in a fun way. But yeah, so more Harry and Holly, and I still have the Patreon that I had back when I was doing webcomics. My audience was really great and followed me over to visual novels, especially because I'd been sneaking my visual novels on there for years, and they were like, yeah, you're gonna do that instead, sure. And so I'm also currently working on a like horror romance and called Non-Platonic Forms. And again, I love deadlines. So basically what I do is every month I update the build so that my patrons get to read like another like 5 to 10,000 words, and they get more placeholder CGs and stuff. That's really great because then, people can tell me like, hey, look at all these typos, fix that. And then I can fix those typos, and that's really nice. Or they can go, oh, do you think this logically makes sense from this choice? I think you can do this. And I'm like, oh yes. So I get the benefit of people getting to enjoy my stuff early and, go wild and make fan art, but they also get to keep me grounded on that by going like, oh, you could do this or you could do that. And that's really, really important for game dev, is to have somebody to tell you not to get too up in your head and only communicate to yourself, and to make sure that it's actually fun to play through. So I've been having a real good time with that, with Non-Platonic Forms. It's romance. It's got some spicy stuff for adults, so know that going in, but it's very, mind games and talking about the artistic process. And there's all these platonic ideals of weird things like diegesis, which is the concept of storytelling when you know that there's a narrator, because I love unreliable narrators. And there's a platonic ideal that used to be the ideal of gamer rage. So he was born in 1969. If you've ever seen the video of one of the inventors of Pong playing against another guy, it's a very old video. It's just like a clip. But he just loses the game, and then you see his soul kind of die inside, and then he rage quits. And it's so funny to see that happening in the 60s. So the idea that that's been around for a while, and just that as a guy, very fun. And Teleporia from Hoping This, or from May I Take Your Order, and she's the platonic ideal of suffering. So she's, she maybe not the nicest person, but she's showed up in there to So some people were really, really happy to see her and Hendrik back, and it's fun to get more into what's going on with them.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me. It's been great talking with you.
Hey, thank you so much. I think you had some really wonderful questions, really got me thinking and chatting, and I hope I haven't been too navel-gazy about things.
And that was today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I'm hoping to hit a regular uploading schedule now that I'm back and returned, so keep an eye out for that. And if you don't want to miss any episodes, make sure to follow and subscribe depending on what platform you're on. And if you want to stay up to date with what's going on with Game Design Hour, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok at Game Design Hour. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I can see you next time.